Mr. Philman, Your Honor, thank you so much for giving us a piece of your time, giving me a piece of your time. I've been spending some time getting to know you behind the scenes with this lovely book. Yes, we did. Leading in Turbulent Times. Thank you for putting this book together.
Well, you're welcome. It was a labor of love for me. I had been asked about doing a book by journalists, by academics, by friends, saying, you know, there was a really an amazing decade there that you were in the Premier's chair for, and a lot of things happened, and nobody can tell your story, so why don't you tell it? And I kept putting it off and putting it off, but finally I did it, and I'm really happy I did.
One of the things I appreciated most is that the book starts with an emotional aspect. We actually get to know your life story in your early beginnings and childhood, and we get all of the feels when we hear about your mother planting an apple tree from a seed or a lemon tree from seed. You came from some awfully humble roots, and I don't know if everybody was always aware of that.
Probably not. I didn't try and hide it, but there's no question that because of what I was doing and the position I was in, nobody really looked back and said, well, what did he come from? I actually wrote that first part of it as a small little book for my grandchildren a couple of years earlier, because I wanted them to know who they come from, what their history is, what stock they carry, so to speak. And so it was an emotional time when I did that, because I did it for the grandchildren, and then we folded it into being the early part of the book.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned there were journalists and members of your team who encouraged you to get this book out and get the chapters together and written for people to read. Barbara Bigger, who is my aunt and was a member of your initial team, said that there was some pressure on you for decades already to get this done. So what made this the right time?
I used to have lunch occasionally with Duff Roblin when he was still alive, and I asked him when he was approaching 80 years of age and he had been out of office for well over 20 years. I said, Duff, you know, you've never written your memoirs, and tell me why. And he said, well, Gary, with this droll voice, he said, I've been waiting for everybody I'm going to write about to die. And so I said, well, okay, I don't think I want to wait that long. But anyway, I got very busy after, you may know that after I left office, I was a member and chair of Canada's Security Intelligence Review Committee. I was on numerous corporate boards and a number of nonprofit boards. And so I finally said, well, you know, if I don't do it now, then it's never going to get done. And it just sort of became, well, this is the time. So about 5 years ago, I started writing vignettes, or little snippets of things that I remembered well, and said, this must be a part of my book. And eventually I had over 35 of them, and we folded it all together as being the basis of a manuscript that it ultimately turned into the book.
Okay. Now, as much as we have known you to be a public figure and always interacting with people and meeting new people and doing very well at it, you have, I was interested to read, you have introverted tendencies and actually come from shyness as a child, which you broke out of when you entered your political career, and even before that as a business owner. But it was when you went into engineering that you really started to come into your own. Would you mind taking us back to that moment? It's in the early chapters of the book, and how that led to your work on the Red River floodway.
Well, I went into engineering mostly because some really good friends of mine were going in, and I didn't know what I was going to do when I was finishing high school. And so I joined them in first year engineering, and ultimately I liked engineering, and I particularly enjoyed hydraulics and water resources. And I had a tremendous prof there, who Professor Cooper, who was a world-renowned expert and had been a part of the original development of the floodway concept for the government. And so then when it came time, just by total accident, as I went to work for a consulting firm they needed somebody to take over the model testing that was going on of the actual floodway development. And I was available. The firm made me available to the university. And so I went out there and I conducted the model testing on several of the floodway structures. And that meant that I was really kind of there on the early part of the development of the floodway. And I was fascinated by it. So it was in my mind then for the rest of the time as I followed when it was completed and all the things that it meant to Winnipeg, as on many occasions leading up to even 97, there was, I think, 17 occasions in which the floodway had to be utilized in the spring runoff. And so I always was feeling proud of my little bit of a role in it, and also a great admirer of Duff Roblin for having had the courage and the political sense to go ahead with it.
Well, it certainly seems like some kind of divine intervention for you to be behind the initial Red River floodway engineering process and then later to be in the position that you were in 1997. Very interesting to see how that all came to be.
Exactly, Jamie. As I sat, looked back on it and thought about it, I thought, how on earth would this happen, that the person who's doing the model testing ultimately becomes the person who's in the premier's chair watching it in action.
Yeah, thank goodness you did a great job. Now, your first campaign effort was something out of a movie. I couldn't even sleep after I read that chapter because I felt like so much anticipation of, did it work, going door to door, being soaked in the rain? But it seemed to work out well for you, although you did learn that the voting happened to be very close, even though you put in so much effort. Looking back, I mean, I want to ask the question, would you have done anything differently? I'm sure you would, knowing the resources that are available now, but at the time it seemed to work.
It did work, Jamie, and I think the reason it did work was because I actually did get to go to almost every door in that whole area that I was running for city council for, and I didn't have any extra time, so I had to do it day after day after day. I'd started at 1 o'clock. I went to the office from 7:30 in the morning, and then went home for a quick bite. Went to work from 1 o'clock on. And as I say, even my eldest daughter, after school, she was about 11 years old, came with me door to door, and it seemed as though that was an attractive thing to a lot of the elderly people living in my area. They thought anybody who could have this child with them is probably an okay person.
Yeah.
And then, as I say in the little story, I almost ran out of time because of the fact that the weather turned. I was having to walk in the rain. It was absolutely crazy, but I felt in the end, because I didn't have lawn signs. That's how naive I was. I thought, well, they'll know me. If I go to every door, then they'll remember me. And I think to a large extent it did work. In fact, it became a central part of all of my campaigning after that. And I won many, many campaigns at the provincial level because I did go door to door and I did believe in it.
I had no idea what an effort it was. Every time you started something new, you had to put in every ounce of effort that you possibly had. It's like you worked twice as hard as many other people who get elected into these positions. And when you were voted in as premier, your team was a very interesting combination of very, very young people, including yourself.
Right. And it turned out to be a huge asset because I had these very intelligent, highly motivated young people. Some of them were still in their 20s, a couple of them were in their 30s. The youngest on the team was 40 years old, and they were my senior staff. They were the people that really did all the organization of the policy side of things, meetings with other premiers and intergovernmental affairs and all of that. And I never felt that I had any less competence behind me as the others in the country. In fact, I thought I had among the best because these people were sharp as a tack and they did a great job for me.
Now, the title suggests turbulent times. Could you do a quick recap of some of the turbulent times that happened during your time?
Well, we were a minority government for more than the first 2 years, and that meant that nothing could be passed in the legislature without the support of at least one of the other parties, or some of the members of one of the parties. So it meant that we had to do a lot of consultation, a lot of understanding of priorities from other people. I think we had to be very careful that we didn't really poke a stick in somebody's eye on the other side of the house so that we angered everybody. And we also had to be sure that what we were doing was what the public wanted. I always felt that if we were going to be defeated, it would have to be on an issue in which we believed strongly that the public wanted it done. And if so, then we would be prepared to go then for re-election. And so we lasted more than 2 years with that collaborative approach and that very careful approach in a minority government. Then we went ahead and we got immediately into Meech Lake as at the latter part of it. And of course, that was a grueling time of pressures from all sides about Meech Lake. We were kind of the linchpin in the country, and everybody's eyes were on us. And in the end, of course, Meech Lake did fail in our legislature. And but we at least followed a process that allowed for a lot of public consultation and, in fact, the involvement of all three parties. So in the end, people felt we had done the right thing, even though it failed. Yeah. Then we go ahead and we went into Charlottetown, which was, again, major collaboration and discussion across the country. Then we go into the loss of the Winnipeg Jets, which was, again, a very emotional time for everybody within the public eye, and the public wanted them saved. Turned out that as long as there wasn't going to be any private investors go to take the club over, it wasn't possible to carry it on. Then we went, of course, into the flood of the century, and then finally, I had some difficulty in my own caucus with an inquiry into into my own government, with an inquiry into what was considered to be unreasonable involvement in the vote in one particular constituency in the 1995 election, and I think there was a loss of public trust in us because of that. So at every step, it wasn't easy. There was a challenge, and we had to be very careful about how we handled it. And the balancing of the budget was not an easy factor. I mean, people felt, on the one hand, that maybe we were too stingy with some areas of government. On the other hand, people were very proud of the fact that not only did we balance the budget, but we had the best balanced budget law in North America, it was said. So we were in the forefront of all those things. Along the way, Jamie, I haven't even talked about some really important things that we did in family law, which were we were the leaders in North America, again, in family law changes that were there to protect what was happening to mostly women. More than 90% of the cases involved violence towards women, and we were the ones who brought in the zero tolerance policy. We were the ones who brought in a separate court system to deal with it. Similarly, drinking and driving laws that were amongst the toughest in the country. We were an early pioneer at bringing in those laws, and so it wasn't as though we were sitting back and waiting for somebody else to get the job done. We were in the forefront of a lot of these things. And you haven't even talked about Janice and how much she meant to my life and my career, and now her own career. So we remain in the public eye, and it's been a pleasure for all of us to be working in this.
I had a feeling you might bring her up.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
And you wrote a lovely chapter on her as well. It was cute. Now, of course, in the last chapter, just a really short chapter called Reflections, you posed the question, what would I like to be remembered for? I know that's been asked of you so much, and it's not a simple answer, but perhaps you could touch on that a little bit. Besides the meat and potatoes and the factual things, what would you like to be remembered
I
for?
think in the end, there's so many things to talk about and so many things that I'm proud of that we did as a government. But I think the best thing that we did was to give Manitobans back their pride in what Manitoba could do and what they could do. We had a bit of a mantra that we used to use internally, not necessarily externally. You can do it from here. So when businesses started up, and Golden West Broadcasting is an example of a huge organization that is born in Manitoba, that continues to grow in Manitoba. And there are many others, whether it was Izzy Asper's empire, whether it was the whole Great West Life and Investors and all those different things, the Richardson empire. But they have now evolved to the point where they compete worldwide on so many different matters. So we were in the midst of, and very great supporters of the of NAFTA, and so we ended up being huge beneficiaries of it because we had the confidence to say, yes, we can do that from here. We can compete. We can be a part of the growth and the opportunity that is represented by this. And so we have huge trucking and distribution industries and things that we do better than anybody else. And I think we gave that confidence. That was what we were trying to do all the time we were there, when other people were saying, oh, well, we can't compete. And the people who opposed NAFTA, for instance, said, we can't compete. And we said, yes, we can. And we did.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great example. And now as it's election time once again, I have learned from reading your book that every vote counts. Absolutely. That's a huge takeaway from your book. How about some encouragement from that perspective as people head to the polls?
Well, I have become, for all good reasons, basically out of the limelight and out of the center of politics. So I don't propose to be supporting anybody in particular. I have obviously my own strong views, but I say to people, the democratic process that we are fortunate to be in. I believe we're the most democratic country in the world. I believe we're the most egalitarian country in the world. When I have traveled, I've said we've got it. We've done it right. We've got the right model. So I say to people, go out and vote, regardless of who you support. Look at things, use your judgment, but vote. I know my parents would have, that was the most important thing that they got coming from Eastern Europe and totalitarian regimes, to come to a place where they could actually vote for and elect a government.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that encouragement. You make me proud to be Manitoban, and I have so appreciated you giving this time to me personally and this book, which I will continue to read. And I have to ask you, are you still playing accordion, or did you put that down years ago?
I put that down. It's in the basement, and probably not to be used by me in the next while.
I'm only asking because I play accordion. So when I saw the picture, oh yes, oh, I love a good polka.
Me too. I love to dance the polka, but invite me to your next recital.
Absolutely, I will. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's so much appreciated, and blessings to you and to Janice as well.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It's been a pleasure.